Chapter 32 of Annals of a Quiet Neighbourhood. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recording by Eric Metzler. Annals of a Quiet Neighbourhood, by George MacDonald. Chapter 32. The Next Thing. As I sat in my study, in the twilight of that same day, the door was hurriedly opened, and Judy entered. She looked about the room with a quick glance to see that we were alone, then caught my hand in both of hers, and burst out crying. "Why, Judy," I said, "what is the matter?" But the sobs would not allow her to answer. I was too frightened to put any more questions, and so stood silent, my chest feeling like an empty tomb that waited for death to fill it. At length, with a strong effort, she checked the succession of her sobs, and spoke. "They are killing Auntie. She looks like a ghost already," said the child, again bursting into tears. "Tell me, Judy, what can I do for her?" "You must find out, Mr Walton. If you loved her as much as I do, you would find out what to do." "But she will not let me do anything for her." "Yes, she will. She says you promised to help her some day." "Did she send you, then?" "No, she did not send me." "Then what can I do?" "Oh, you exact people! You must have everything square and in print before you move. If it had been me, now, wouldn't I have been off like a shot? Do get your hat, Mr Walton." "Come then, Judy, I will go at once. Shall I see her?" And every vein throbbed at the thought of rescuing her from her persecutors, though I had not yet the slightest idea how it was to be effected. "We will talk about that as we go," said Judy, authoritatively. In a moment more we were in the open air. It was a still night, with an odour of damp earth, and a hint of green buds in it. A pale half-moon hung in the sky, now and then hidden by the clouds that swept across it, for there was wind in the heavens, though upon earth all was still. I offered Judy my arm, but she took my hand, and we walked on without a word till we had got through the village and out upon the road. "Now, Judy," I said at last, "tell me what they are doing to your aunt." "I don't know what they are doing, but I'm sure she will die." "Is she ill?" "She is as white as a sheet, and will not leave her room. Granny must have frightened her dreadfully. Everybody's frightened at her but me, and I begin to be frightened too. And what will become of Auntie then?" "But what can her mother do to her?" "I don't know. I think it is her determination to have her own way that makes Auntie afraid she will get it somehow, and she says now she will rather die than marry Captain Everard. Then there's no one allowed to wait on her but Sarah, and I know the very sight of her is enough to turn Auntie sick almost. What has become of Jane I don't know. I haven't seen her all day, and the servants are whispering together more than usual. Auntie can't eat what Sarah brings her, I'm sure. Else I should almost fancy she was starving herself to death to keep clear of that Captain Everard." "Is he still at the Hall?" "Yes, but I don't think it is altogether his fault. Granny won't let him go. I don't believe he knows how determined Auntie is not to marry him. Only, to be sure, though Granny never lets her have more than 5 shillings in her pocket at a time, she will be worth something when she's married." "Nothing can make her worth more than she is, Judy," I said, perhaps with some discontent in my tone. "That's as you and I think, Mr Walton. Not as Granny and the Captain think at all. I dare say he would not care much more than Granny whether she was willing or not, so long as she married him." "But, Judy, we must have some plan laid before we reach the Hall, else my coming will be of no use." "Of course. I know how much I can do, and you must arrange the rest with her. I will take you to the little room upstairs. We call it the Octagon. That, you know, is just under Auntie's room. They will be at dinner, the Captain and Granny. I will leave you there, and tell Auntie that you want to see her." "But, Judy—" "Don't you want to see her, Mr Walton?" "Yes, I do, more than you can think." "Then I will tell her so." "But will she come to me?" "I don't know. We have to find that out." "Very well. I leave myself in your hands." I was now perfectly collected. All my dubitation and distress were gone, for I had something to do, although what I could not yet tell. That she did not love Captain Everard was plain, and that she had as yet resisted her mother was also plain, though it was not equally certain that she would, if left at her mercy, go on to resist her. This was what I hoped to strengthen her to do. I saw nothing more within my reach as yet. But from what I knew of Miss Oldcastle, I saw plainly enough that no greater good could be done for her than this enabling to resistance. Self-assertion was so foreign to her nature that it needed a sense of duty to rouse her even to self-defence. As I have said before, she was clad in the mail of endurance, but was utterly without weapons. And there was a danger of her conduct, and then of her mind giving way at last, from the gradual inroads of weakness upon the thews of which she left unexercised. In respect of this, I prayed heartily that I might help her. Judy and I scarcely spoke to each other from the moment we entered the gate till I found myself at a side door which I had never observed till now. It was fastened, and Judy told me to wait till she went in and opened it. The moon was now quite obscured, and I was under no apprehension of discovery. While I stood there I could not help thinking of Dr Duncan's story, and reflecting that the daughter was now returning the kindness shown to the mother. I had not to wait long before the door opened behind me noiselessly, and I stepped into the dark house. Judy took me by the hand, and led me along a passage, and then up a stair into the little drawing-room. There was no light. She led me to a seat at the farther end, and opening a door close beside me, left me in the dark. There I sat so long that I fell into a fit of musing, broken ever by startled expectation. Castle after castle I built up. Castle after castle fell to pieces in my hands. Still she did not come. At length I got so restless and excited that only the darkness kept me from starting up and pacing the room. Still she did not come, and partly from weakness, partly from hope deferred, I found myself beginning to tremble all over. Nor could I control myself. As the trembling increased, I grew alarmed lest I should become unable to carry out all that might be necessary. Suddenly, from out of the dark, a hand settled on my arm. I looked up and could just see the whiteness of a face. Before I could speak, a voice said brokenly, in a half-whisper, "Will you save me, Mr Walton? But you're trembling. You are ill. You ought not to have come to me. I will get you something." And she moved to go, but I held her. All my trembling was gone in a moment. Her words, so careful of me even in her deep misery, went to my heart and gave me strength. The suppressed feelings of many months rushed to my lips. What I said I do not know, but I know that I told her I loved her. And I know that she did not draw her hand from mine when I said so. But ere I ceased came a revulsion of feeling. "Forgive me," I said. "I am selfishness itself to speak to you thus now, to take advantage of your misery to make you listen to mine. But at least it will make you sure that if all I am, all I have will save you." "But I am saved already," she interposed, "if you love me, for I love you." And for some moments there were no words to speak. I stood holding her hand, conscious only of God and her. At last I said, "There is no time now but for action, nor do I see anything but to go with me at once. Will you come home to my sister? Or I will take you wherever you please." "I will go with you anywhere you think best. Only take me away." "Put on your bonnet, then, and a warm cloak, and we will settle all about it as we go." She had scarcely left the room when Mrs Oldcastle came to the door. "No lights here," she said. "Sarah, bring candles, and tell Captain Everard, when he will join us, to come to the octagon room. Where can that little Judy be? The child gets more and more troublesome, I do think. I must take her in hand." I had been in great perplexity how to let her know that I was there. For to announce yourself to a lady by a voice out of the darkness of her boudoir, or to wait for candles to discover you where she thought she was quite alone, neither is a pleasant way of presenting yourself to her consciousness. But I was helped out of the beginning into the middle of my difficulties, once more by that blessed little Judy. I did not know she was in the room till I heard her voice. Nor do I yet know how much she had heard of the conversation between her aunt and myself. For although I sometimes see her look roguish even now that she is a middle-aged woman with many children, when anything is said which might be supposed to have a possible reference to that night, I have never cared to ask her. "Here I am, Granny," said her voice. "But I won't be taken in hand by you or anyone else. I tell you that. So mind. And Mr Walton is here too, and Aunt Ethelwyn is going out with him for a long walk." "What do you mean, you silly child?" "I mean what I said." And "Miss Judy speaks the truth," fell together from her lips and mine. "Mr Walton," began Mrs Oldcastle indignantly, "it is not scarcely like a gentleman to come where you are not wanted." Here Judy interrupted her. "I beg your pardon, Granny. Mr Walton was wanted, very much wanted. I went and fetched him." But Mrs Oldcastle went on unheeding. "And to be sitting in my room in the dark, too." "That couldn't be helped, grannie. Here comes Sarah with candles." "Sarah," said Mrs Oldcastle, "ask Captain Everard to be kind enough to step this way." "Yes, ma'am," answered Sarah, with an untranslatable look at me as she set down the candles. We could now see each other. Knowing words to be but idle breath, I would not complicate matters by speech, but stood silent, regarding Mrs Oldcastle. She on her part did not flinch, but returned my look with one both haughty and contemptuous. In a few moments Captain Everard entered, bowed slightly, and looked to Mrs Oldcastle as if for an explanation. Whereupon she spoke, but to me. "Mr Walton," she said, "will you explain to Captain Everard to what we owe the unexpected pleasure of a visit from you?" "Captain Everard has no claim to any explanation from me. To you, Mrs Oldcastle, I would have answered, had you asked me, that I was waiting for Miss Oldcastle." "Pray inform Miss Oldcastle, Judy, that Mr Walton insists upon seeing her at once." "That is quite unnecessary. Miss Oldcastle will be here presently," I said. Mrs Oldcastle turned slightly livid with wrath. She was always white, as I have said. The change I can describe only by the word I have used, indicating a bluish darkening of the whiteness. She walked towards the door beside me. I stepped between her and it. "Pardon me, Mrs Oldcastle. That is the way to Miss Oldcastle's room. I am here to protect her." Without saying a word she turned and looked at Captain Everard. He advanced with a long stride of determination. But ere he reached me the door behind me opened, and Miss Oldcastle appeared in her bonnet and shawl, carrying a small bag in her hand. Seeing how things were, the moment she entered, she put her hand on my arm, and stood fronting the enemy with me. Judy was on my right, her eyes flashing, and her cheek as red as a peony, evidently prepared to do battle à toute outrance for her friends. "Miss Oldcastle, go to your room instantly, I command you," said her mother, and she approached as if to remove her hand from my arm. I put my other arm between her and her daughter. "No, Mrs Oldcastle," I said. "You have lost all a mother's rights by ceasing to behave like a mother. Miss Oldcastle will never more do anything in obedience to your commands, whatever she may do in compliance with your wishes." "Allow me to remark," said Captain Everard, with attempted nonchalance, "that is a strange doctrine for your cloth." "So much the worse for my cloth, then," I answered, "and the better for yours if it leads you to act more honourably." Still keeping himself entrenched in the affectation of a supercilious indifference, he smiled haughtily, and gave a look of dramatic appeal to Mrs Oldcastle. "At least," said that lady, "do not disgrace yourself, Ethelwyn, by leaving the house in this unaccountable manner at night and on foot. If you will leave the protection of your mother's roof, wait at least till tomorrow." "I would rather spend the night in the open air than pass another under your roof, mother. You have been a strange mother to me, and Dorothy too." "At least do not put your character in question by going out in this unmaidenly fashion. People will talk to your prejudice, and Mr Walton's too." Ethelwyn smiled. She was now as collected as I was, seeming to have cast off all her weakness. My heart was uplifted more than I can say. She knew her mother too well to be caught by the change in her tone. I had not hitherto interrupted her once when she took the answer upon herself, for she was not one to be checked when she chose to speak. But now she answered nothing, only looked at me, and I understood her, of course. "They will hardly have time to do so, I trust, before it will be out of their power. It rests with Miss Oldcastle herself to say when that shall be." As if she never suspected that such was the result of her scheming, Mrs Oldcastle's demeanour changed utterly. The form of her visage was altered. She made a spring at her daughter, and seized her by the arm. "Then I forbid it," she screamed, "and I will be obeyed. I stand on my rights. Go to your room, you minx." "There is no law, human or divine, to prevent her from marrying whom she will. How old are you, Ethelwyn?" I thought it better to seem even cooler than I was. 27, answered Miss Oldcastle. "Is it possible you can be so foolish, Mrs Oldcastle, as to think you have the slightest hold on your daughter's freedom? Let her arm go." But she kept her grasp. "You hurt me, mother," said Miss Oldcastle. "Hurt you, you smooth-faced hypocrite! I will hurt you then." But I took Mrs Oldcastle's arm in my hand, and she let go her hold. "How dare you touch a woman?" she said. "Because she has so far ceased to be a woman as to torture her own daughter." Here Captain Everard stepped forward, saying, "The Riot Act ought to be read, I think. It is time for the military to interfere." "Well put, Captain Everard," I said. "Our side will disperse, if you will only leave room for us to go." "Possibly I may have something to say in the matter." "Say on." "This lady has jilted me." "Have you, Ethelwyn?" "I have not." "Then, Captain Everard, you lie." "You dare to tell me so?" And he strode a pace nearer. "It needs no daring. I know you too well, and so does another who trusted you, and found you false as hell." "You presume on your cloth, but—" he said, lifting his hand. "You may strike me, presuming on my cloth," I answered, "and I will not return your blow. Insult me as you will, and I will bear it. Call me coward, and I will say nothing. But lay one hand on me to prevent me from doing my duty, and I knock you down, or find you more of a man than I take you for." It was either conscience or something not so good that made a coward of him. He turned on his heel. "I really am not sufficiently interested in the affair to oppose you. You may take the girl for me. Both your cloth and the presence of ladies protect your insolence. I do not like brawling where one cannot fight. You shall hear from me before long, Mr Walton." "No, Captain Everard, I shall not hear from you. You know you dare not write to me. I know that of you which, even on the code of the duellist, would justify any gentleman in refusing to meet you. Stand out of my way." I advanced with Mrs Oldcastle on my arm. He drew back, and we left the room. As we reached the door, Judy bounded after us, threw her arms around her aunt's neck, then around mine, kissing us both, and returned to her place on the sofa. Mrs Oldcastle gave a scream, and sunk fainting on a chair. It was a last effort to detain her daughter and gain time. Miss Oldcastle would have returned, but I would not permit her. "No," I said, "she will be better without you. Judy, ring the bell for Sarah." "How dare you give orders in my house?" exclaimed Mrs Oldcastle, sitting bolt upright in the chair, and shaking her fist at us. Then, assuming the heroic, she added, "From this moment she is no daughter of mine. Nor can you touch one farthing of her money, sir. You have married a beggar after all, and that you'll both know before long." "Thy money perish with thee," I said, and repented the moment I had said it. It sounded like an imprecation, and I know I had no correspondent feeling, for, after all, she was the mother of my Ethelwyn. But the allusion to money made me so indignant that the words burst from me ere I could consider their import. The cool wind greeted us like the breath of God. As we left the house and closed the door behind us, the moon was shining from the edge of a vaporous mountain, which gradually drew away from her, leaving her alone in the midst of a lake of blue. But we had not gone many paces from the house when Miss Oldcastle began to tremble violently, and could scarcely get along with all the help I could give her. Nor, for the space of 6 weeks, did one word pass between us about the painful occurrences of that evening. For all that time she was quite unable to bear it. When we managed at last to reach the vicarage, I gave her in charge to my sister, with instructions to help her to bed at once, while I went for Dr Duncan. Chapter 32. Recording by Eric Metzler, Albuquerque, New Mexico, United States of America.
Chapter 33 of Annals of a Quiet Neighbourhood. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. Annals of a Quiet Neighbourhood by George MacDonald. Chapter 33. Old Rogers's Thanksgiving. I found the old man seated at his dinner, which he left immediately when he heard that Miss Oldcastle needed his help. In a few words I told him, as we went, the story of what had befallen at the Hall, to which he listened with the interest of a boy reading a romance, asking 20 questions about the particulars which I hurried over. Then he shook me warmly by the hand, saying, "You have fairly won her, Walton, and I am as glad of it as I could be of anything I can think of. She is well worth all you must have suffered. This will at length remove the curse from that wretched family. You have saved her from perhaps even a worse fate than her sisters." "I fear she will be ill, though," I said, after all that she has gone through. But I did not even suspect how ill she would be. As soon as I heard Dr Duncan's opinion of her, which was not very definite, a great fear seized upon me that I was destined to lose her after all. This fear, however, terrible as it was, did not torture me like the fear that had preceded it. I could oftener feel able to say, "Thy will be done," than I could before. Mr Duncan was hardly out of the house when Old Rogers arrived, and was shown into his study. He looked excited. I allowed him to tell out his story, which was his daughter's of course, without interruption. He ended by saying, "Now, sir, you really must do summat. This won't do in a Christian country. We ain't aboard ship here, with a nor'easter a walking the quarter–deck." "There's no occasion, my dear fellow, to do anything." He was taken aback. "Well, I don't understand you, Mr Walton. You're the last man I'd have expected to argufy for faith without works. It's right to trust in God, but if you don't stand to your halyards, your craft'll miss stays, and your faith'll be blown out of the bolt–ropes in the turn of a marlinspike." I suspect there was some confusion in the figure, but the old man's meaning was plain enough. Nor would I keep him in a moment more of suspense. "Miss Oldcastle is in the house, Old Rogers," I said. "What house, sir?" returned the old man, his grey eyes opening wider as he spoke. "This house, to be sure." I shall never forget the look the old man cast upwards, or the reality given to it by the ordinarily odd sailor fashion of pulling his forelock, as he returned inward thanks to the Father for all his kindness to his friend. And never in my now wide circle of readers shall I find one, the most educated and responsive, who will listen to my story with a more gracious interest than that old man showed as I recounted to him the adventures of the evening. There were few to whom I could have told them. To Old Rogers I felt that it was right and natural and dignified to tell the story even of my love's victory. How, then, am I able to tell it to the world as now? I can easily explain the seeming inconsistency. It is not merely that I am speaking, as I have said before, from behind a screen, or as clothed in the coat of darkness of an anonymous writer, but I find that, as I come nearer and nearer to the invisible world, all my brothers and sisters grow dearer and dearer to me. I feel towards them more and more as the children of my Father in heaven, and although some of them are good children, and some naughty children, some very lovable, and some hard to love, yet I never feel that they are below me, or unfit to listen to the story even of my love, if they only care to listen, and if they do not care, there is no harm done, except they read it. Even should they, and then scoff at what seemed and seems to me the precious story, I have these defences: first, that it was not for them that I cast forth my precious pearls, for precious to me is the significance of every fact in my history; not that it is mine, for I have only been as clay in the hands of the potter, but that it is God's, who made my history as it seemed, and was good to him. And second, that even should they trample them under their feet, they cannot well get at me to rend me. And more, the nearer I come to the region beyond, the more I feel that in that land a man needs not shrink from uttering his deepest thoughts, inasmuch as he that understands them not will not therefore revile him. But you are not there yet. You are in the land in which the brother speaketh evil of that which he understandeth not. True, friend, too true. But I only do as Dr Donne did in writing that poem in his sickness, when he thought he was near to the world of which we speak. I rehearse now, that I may find it easier then. Since I am coming to that holy room, where with the choir of saints for evermore I shall be made thy music as I come, in tune the instrument here at the door. And what I must do then, think here before. When Rogers had thanked God, he rose, took my hand, and said, "Mr Walton, you will preach now. I thank God for the good we shall all get from the trouble you have gone through." "I ought to be the better for it," I answered. "You will be the better for it," he returned. I believe I've allus been the better for any trouble as ever I had to go through with. I couldn't quite say the same for every bit of good luck I had. Leastways, I consider trouble the best luck a man can have. And I wish you a good night, sir. Thank God again." "But, Rogers, you don't mean it would be good for us to have bad luck always, do you? You shouldn't be pleased at what's come to me now, in that case." "No, sir, sartainly not." "How can you say, then, that bad luck is the best luck?" "I mean the bad luck that comes to us, not the bad luck that doesn't come. But you're right, sir. Good luck or bad luck's both best when He sends 'em, as He allus does. In fact, sir, there is no bad luck but what comes out o' the man himself. The rest's all good." But whether it was the consequence of a reaction from the mental strain I had suffered, or the depressing effect of Miss Oldcastle's illness coming so close upon the joy of winning her, or that I was more careless and less anxious to do my duty than I ought to have been, I greatly fear that Old Rogers must have been painfully disappointed in the sermons which I did preach for several of the following Sundays. He never even hinted at such a fact, but I felt it much myself. A man has often to be humbled through failure, especially after success. I do not clearly know how my failures worked upon me, but I think a man may sometimes get spiritual good without being conscious of the point of its arrival, or being able to trace the process by which it was wrought in him. I believe that my failures did work some humility in me, and a certain carelessness of outward success, even in spiritual matters, so far as the success affected me, provided only the will of God was done in the dishonour of my weakness. And I think, but I am not sure, that soon after I approached this condition of mind, I began to preach better. But still I found for some time that however much the subject of my sermon interested me in my study, or in the church or vestry on the Saturday evening, nay, even although my heart was full of fervour during the prayers and lessons, no sooner had I begun to speak than the glow died out of the sky of my thoughts. A dull clearness of the intellectual faculties took its place, and I was painfully aware that what I could speak without being moved myself was not the most likely utterance to move the feelings of those who only listened. Still a man may occasionally be used by the Spirit of God as the inglorious trumpet of a prophecy, instead of being inspired with the life of the word, and hence speaking out of a full heart in testimony of that which he hath known and seen. I hardly remember when or how I came upon the plan, but now, as often as I find myself in such a condition, I turn away from any attempts to produce a sermon, and taking up one of the sayings of our Lord which he himself has said, our spirit and our life, I labour simply to make the people see in it what I see in it, and when I find that thus my own heart is warmed, I am justified in the hope that the hearts of some at least of my hearers are thereby warmed likewise. But no doubt the fact that the life of Miss Oldcastle seemed to tremble in the balance had something to do with those results of which I have already said too much. My design had been to go at once to London, and make preparation for as early a wedding as she would consent to, but the very day after I brought her home, life and not marriage was the question. Dr Duncan looked very grave, and although he gave me all the encouragement he could, all his encouragement did not amount to much. There was such a lack of vitality about her. The treatment to which she had been for so long a time subjected had depressed her till life was nearly quenched from lack of hope. Nor did the sudden change seem able to restore the healthy action of what the old physicians called the animal spirits. Possibly the strong reaction paralysed their channels, and thus prevented her gladness from reaching her physical nature, so as to operate on its health. Her whole complaint appeared in excessive weakness. Finding she had fainted after every little excitement, I left her for 4 weeks entirely to my sister and Dr Duncan, during which time she never saw me, and it was long before I could venture to stay in her room more than a minute or two. But as summer approached she began to show signs of reviving life, and by the end of May she was able to be wheeled into the garden in a chair. During her aunt's illness Judy came often to the vicarage, but Miss Oldcastle was unable to see her any more than myself without the painful consequence which I have mentioned. So the dear child always came to me in the study, and through her endless vivacity infected me with some of her hope, for she had no fears whatever about her aunt's recovery. I had had some painful apprehensions as to the treatment Judy herself might meet with from her grandmother, and had been doubtful whether I ought not to have carried her off as well as her aunt. But the first time she came, which was the next day, she set my mind at rest on that subject. "But does your granny know where you are come?" I had asked her. "So well, Mr Walton," she replied, "that there was no occasion to tell her. Why shouldn't I rebel as well as Aunt Winnie, I wonder?" she added, looking archness itself. "How does she bear it?" "Bear what, Mr Walton?" "The loss of your aunt." "You don't think granny cares about that, do you? She's vexed enough at the loss of Captain Everard. Do you know, I think he had too much wine yesterday, or he wouldn't have made quite such a fool of himself." "I fear he hadn't had quite enough to give him courage, Judy. I dare say he was brave enough once, but a bad conscience soon destroys a man's courage." "Why do you call it a bad conscience, Mr Walton? I should have thought that a bad conscience was one that would let a girl go on anyhow, and say nothing about it to make her uncomfortable." "You are quite right, Judy. That is the worst kind of conscience, certainly. But tell me, how does Mrs Oldcastle bear it?" "You asked me that already." Somehow Judy's words always seemed more pert upon paper than they did upon her lips. Her naivety, the twinkling light in her eyes, and the smile flitting about her mouth, always modified greatly the expression of her words. "Granny never says a word about you or auntie either." "But you said she was vexed. How do you know that?" "Because ever since the captain went away this morning, she won't speak a word to Sarah even." "Are you not afraid of her locking you up some day or other?" "Not a bit of it. Granny won't touch me, and you shouldn't tempt me to run away from her like auntie. I won't. Granny is a naughty old lady, and I don't believe anybody loves her but me. Not Sarah, I'm certain. Therefore I can't leave her, and I won't leave her, Mr Walton, whatever you may say about her." "Indeed, I don't want you to leave her, Judy." And Judy did not leave her as long as she lived, and the old lady's love to that child was at least one redeeming point in her fierce character. No one can tell how much good it may have done her before she died, though but a few years passed before her soul was required of her. Before that time came, however, a quarrel took place between her and Sarah, which quarrel I incline to regard as a hopeful sign. And to this day Judy has never heard how her old granny treated her mother. When she learns it now from these pages, I think she will be glad that she did not know it before her death. The old lady would see neither doctor nor parson, nor would she hear of sending for her daughter. The only sign of softening that she gave was that once she folded her granddaughter in her arms and wept long and bitterly. Perhaps the thought of her dying child came back upon her, along with the reflection that the only friend she had was the child of that marriage which she had prosecuted to dissolution. End of chapter 33.
Chapter 34 of Annals of a Quiet Neighbourhood. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Eric Metzler. Annals of a Quiet Neighbourhood, by George MacDonald. Chapter 34. Tom's Story. My reader will perceive that this part of my story is drawing to a close. It embraces but a brief period of my life, and I've plenty more behind not altogether unworthy of record. But the portions of any man's life most generally interesting are those in which, while the outward history is most stirring, it derives its chief significance from accompanying conflict within. It is not the rapid change of events, or the unusual concourse of circumstances that alone can interest the thoughtful mind; while, on the other hand, internal change and tumult can be ill set forth to the reader, save they be accompanied and in part, at least, occasioned by outward events capable of embodying and elucidating the things that are of themselves unseen. For man's life ought to be a whole, and not to mention the spiritual necessities of our nature, to leave the fact alone that a man is a mere thing of shreds and patches until his heart is united, as the psalmist says, to fear the name of God. To leave these considerations aside, I say, no man's life is fit for a representation as a work of art save in proportion as there has been a significant relation between his outer and inner life, a visible outcome of some sort of harmony between them. Therefore I chose the portion in which I had suffered most, and in which the outward occurrences of my own life had been most interesting, for the fullest representation, while I reserve for a more occasional and fragmentary record many things in the way of experience, thought, observation, and facts in the history both of myself and individuals of my flock, which admit of, and indeed require, a more individual treatment than would be altogether suitable to a continuous story. But before I close this part of my communications with those whom I count my friends, for till they assure me of the contrary I mean to flatter myself with considering my readers generally as such, I must gather up the ends of my thread, and dispose them in such a manner that they shall neither hang too loose, nor yet refuse length enough for what my friend Rogers would call splicing. It was yet summer when Miss Oldcastle and I were married. It was to me a day awful in its gladness. She was now quite well, and no shadow hung upon her half-moon forehead. We went for a fortnight into Wales, and then returned to the vicarage and the duties of the parish, in which my wife was quite ready to assist me. Perhaps it would help the wives of some clergymen out of some difficulties, and be their protection against some reproaches, if they would at once take the position with regard to the parishioners which Mrs Walton took, namely, that of their servant, but not in her own right, in her husband's. She saw, and told them so, that the best thing she could do for them was to help me, that she held no office whatever in the parish, and they must apply to me when anything went amiss. Had she not constantly refused to be a judge or a divider, she would have been constantly troubled with quarries too paltry to be referred to me, and which were the sooner forgotten that the litigants were not drawn on further and further into the desert of dispute by the mirage of a justice that could quench no thirst. Only when any such affair was brought before me, did she use her good offices to bring about a right feeling between the contending parties, generally next-door neighbours, and mostly women, who being at home all day, found their rights clash in a manner that seldom happened with those that worked in the fields. Whatever her counsel could do, however, had full scope through me, who earnestly sought it. And whatever she gave the poor, she gave as a private person, out of her own pocket. She never administered the communion offering, that is, after finding out, as she soon did, that it was a source of endless dispute between some of the recipients, who regarded it as their common property, and were never satisfied with what they received. This is the case in many country parishes, I fear. As soon as I came to know it, I simply told the recipients that, although the communion offering belonged to them, yet the distribution of it rested entirely with me, and that I would distribute it neither according to their fancied merits nor the degree of friendship I felt for them, but according to the best judgment I could form as to their necessities. And if any of them thought these were underrated, they were quite at liberty to make a fresh representation of them to me. But that I, who knew more about their neighbours than it was likely they did, and was not prejudiced by the personal regards which they could hardly fail to be influenced by, was more likely than they were to arrive at an equitable distribution of the money, upon my principles if not on theirs. And at the same time I tried to show them that a very great part of the disputes in the world came from our having a very keen feeling of our own troubles, and a very dull feeling of our neighbours'. For if the case was reversed, and our neighbours' condition became ours, 10 to 1 our judgment would be reversed likewise. And I think some of them got sense out of what I said. But I ever found the great difficulty in my dealing with my people to be the preservation of the authority which was needful for service. For when the elder serve the younger, and in many cases it is not age that determines seniority, they must not forget that without which the service they offer will fail to be received as such by those to whom it is offered. At the same time, they must ever take heed that their claim to authority be founded on the truth, and not on ecclesiastical or social position. Their standing in the church accredits their offer of service. The service itself can only be accredited by the truth and the Lord of truth, who is the servant of all. But it cost both me and my wife some time and some suffering before we learned how to deport ourselves in these respects. In the same manner she avoided the too near, because unprofitable, approaches of a portion of the richer part of the community. For from her probable position in time to come, rather than her position in time past, many of the fashionable people in the county began to call upon her, in no small degree to her annoyance, simply from the fact that she and they had so little in common. So while she performed all towards them that etiquette demanded, she excused herself from the closer intimacy which some of them courted, on the ground of the many duties which naturally fell to the parson's wife in a country parish like ours. And I am sure that long before we had gained the footing we now have, we had begun to reap the benefits of this mode of regarding our duty in the parish as one, springing from the same source, and tending to the same end. The parson's wife who takes to herself authority in virtue of her position, and the parson's wife who disclaims all connection with the professional work of her husband, are equally out of place in being parsons' wives. The one who refuses to serve denies her greatest privilege. The one who will be a mistress receives the greater condemnation. When the wife is one with her husband, and the husband is worthy, the position will soon reveal itself. But there cannot be many clergymen's wives amongst my readers, and I may have occupied more space than reasonable with this large discourse. I apologize, and, there is room to fear, go on to do the same again. As I write, I am seated in that little octagonal room overlooking the quarry, with its green lining of trees, and its deep central well. It is my study now. My wife is not yet too old to prefer the little room in which she thought and suffered so much, to every other, although the stair that leads to it is high and steep. Nor do I object to her preference, because there is no ready way to reach it save through this. I see her the oftener. And although I do not like anyone to look over my shoulder while I write, it disconcerts me somehow. Yet the moment the sheet is finished and flung on the heap, it is her property, as the print, reader, is yours. I hear her step overhead now. She is opening her window. Now I hear her door close, and now her foot is on the stair. "Come in, love. I've just finished another sheet. There it is. What shall I end the book with? What shall I tell the friends with whom I have been conversing so often and so long, for the last thing ere for a little while I bid them good-bye?" And Ethelwyn bends her smooth forehead, for she has a smooth forehead still, although the hair that crowns it is almost white, over the last few sheets, and while she reads, I will tell those who will read one of the good things that come of being married. It is, that there is one face upon whom the changes come without your seeing them, or rather, there is one face which you can still see the same through all the shadows which years have gathered and heaped upon it. No, stay, I've got a better way of putting it still. There is one face whose final beauty you can see the mirror clearly as the bloom of youth departs, and the loveliness of wisdom and the beauty of holiness take its place. For in it you behold all that you loved before, veiled, it is true, but glowing with gathered brilliance under the veil. Stop one moment, my dear, from which it will one day shine out like the moon from under a cloud, when a stream of the upper air floats it from off her face. Now, Ethelwyn, I am ready. What shall I write about next? I don't think you have told them anywhere about Tom. No more I have. I meant to do so, but I am ashamed of it. The more reason to tell it. You are quite right. I will go on with it at once. But you must not stand there behind me. When I was a child, I could always confess best when I hid my face with my hands. Besides, said Ethelwyn, without seeming to hear what I said, I do not want to have people saying that the vicar has made himself out so good that nobody can believe in him. That would be a great fault in my book, Ethelwyn. What does it come from in me? Let me see. I do not think I want to appear better than I am, but it sounds hypocritical to make merely general confessions, and it is indecorous to make particular ones. Besides, I doubt if it is good to write much about bad things, even in the way of confession. Well, well, never mind justifying it, said Ethelwyn. I don't want any justification. But here is a chance for you. The story will, I think, do good and not harm. You had better tell it, I do think. So if you are inclined, I will go away at once, and leave you go on without interruption. You will have it finished before dinner, and Tom is coming, and you can tell him what you have done. So, reader, now my wife has left me, I will begin. It shall not be a long story. As soon as my wife and I had settled down at home, and I had begun to arrange my work again, it came to my mind that for a long time I had been doing very little for Tom Weir. I could not blame myself much for this, and I was pretty sure neither he nor his father blamed me at all. But I now saw that it was time we should recommence something definite in the way of study. When he came to my house the next morning, and I proceeded to acquaint myself with what he had been doing, I found to my great pleasure that he had made very considerable progress both in Latin and mathematics, and I resolved that I would now push him a little. I found this only brought out his mettle, and his progress, as it seemed to me, was extraordinary. Nor was this all. There were such growing signs of goodness in addition to the uprightness which had first led to our acquaintance, that although I carefully abstained from making the suggestion to him, I was more than pleased when I discovered, from some remark he made, that he would gladly give himself to the service of the Church. At the same time I felt compelled to be the more cautious in anything I said, from the fact that the prospect of the social elevation which would be involved in the change might be a temptation to him, as no doubt it has been to many a man of humble birth. However, as I continued to observe him closely, my conviction was deepened that he was rarely fitted for ministering to his fellows, and soon it came to speech between his father and me, when I found that Thomas, so far from being unfavourably inclined to the proposal, was prepared to spend the few savings of his careful life upon his education. To this, however, I could not listen, because there was his daughter Mary, who was very delicate, and his grandchild too, for whom he ought to make what little provision he could. I therefore took the matter in my own hands, and by means of a judicious combination of experience and what money I could spare, I managed, at less expense than most parents suppose to be unavoidable, to maintain my young friend at Oxford till such time as he gained a fellowship. I felt justified in doing so in part from the fact that some day or other Mrs Walton would inherit the Oldcastle property, as well as come into possession of certain moneys of her own, now in the trust of her mother and two gentlemen in London, which would be nearly sufficient to free the estate from encumbrance, although she could not touch it as long as her mother lived and chose to refuse her the use of it, at least without a lawsuit, with which neither of us was inclined to have anything to do. But I did not lose a penny by the affair. For of the very first money Tom received after he had got his fellowship, he brought the half to me, and continued to do so until he had repaid me every shilling I had spent upon him. As soon as he was in deacon's orders, he came to assist me for a while as curate, and I found him a great help and comfort. He occupied the large room over his father's shop, which had been his grandfather's. He had been dead for some years. I was now engaged on a work which I had been contemplating for a long time, upon the development of the love of nature as shown in the earlier literature of the Jews and Greeks, through that of the Romans, Italians, and other nations, with the Anglo-Saxon for a fresh starting point, into its latest forms in Gray, Thomson, Cowper, Crabbe, Wordsworth, Keats, and Tennyson. And Tom supplied me with much of the time which I bestowed upon this object, and I was really grateful to him. But in looking back, and trying to account to myself for the snare into which I fell, I see plainly enough that I thought too much of what I had done for Tom, and too little of the honour God had done me in allowing me to help Tom. I took the high dais thrown over him, not consciously, I believe, but still with a contemptible condescension, not of manner but of heart, so delicately refined by the innate sophistry of my selfishness, that the better nature in me called it only fatherly friendship, and did not recognize it as that abominable thing so favoured of all those that especially worship themselves. But I abused my fault instead of confessing it. One evening a gentle tap came to my door, and Tom entered. He looked pale and anxious, and there was an uncertainty about his motions which I could not understand. "What is the matter, Tom?" I asked. "I wanted to say something to you, sir," answered Tom. "Say on," I returned cheerily. "It is not so easy to say, sir," rejoined Tom, with a faint smile. "Miss Walton, sir." "Well, what of her? There's nothing happened to her? She was here a few minutes ago, though now I think of it." Here a suspicion of the truth flashed on me, and struck me dumb. I am now covered with shame to think how, when the thing approached myself on that side, it swept away for the moment all my fine theories about the equality of men in Christ their head. How could Tom Weir, whose father was a joiner, who had been a lad in a London shop himself, dare to propose marrying my sister? Instead of thinking of what he really was, my regard rested upon this and that stage through which he had passed to reach his present condition. In fact, I regarded him rather as of my making than of God's. Perhaps it might do something to modify the scorn of all classes for those beneath them, to consider that, by regarding others thus, they justify those above them in looking down upon them in their turn. In London shops, I am credibly informed, the young women who serve in the show-rooms or behind the counters are called ladies, and talk of the girls who make up the articles for sale as persons. To the learned professions, however, the distinction between the shopwomen and milliners is, from their superior height, unrecognizable, while doctors and lawyers are again, I doubt not, masked by countesses and other blue-blooded realities, with the literary lions who roar at soirees and kettle-drums, or even with chiropodists and violin-players. But I am growing scornful at scorn, and forget that I too have been scornful. Brothers, sisters, all good men and true women, let the Master seat us where he will. Until he says, "Come up higher," let us sit at the foot of the board, or stand behind, honoured in waiting upon his guests. All that kind of thing is worth nothing in the kingdom, and nothing will be remembered of us but the Master's judgment. I have known a good churchwoman who would be sweet as a sister to the abject poor, but offensively condescending to a shopkeeper or a dissenter, exactly as if he was a pariah and she a Brahmin. I have known good people who were noble and generous toward their so-called inferiors, and full of the rights of the race, until it touched their own family, and just no longer. Yea, I, who had talked like this for years, at once, when Tom Weir wanted to marry my sister, lost my faith in the broad lines of human distinction judged according to appearances in which I did not even believe, and judged not righteous judgment. For, reasoned the world in me, is it not too bad to drag your wife in for such an alliance? Has she not lowered herself enough already? Has she not married far before her accredited position in society? Will she not feel injured by your family if she see it capable of forming such a connection? What answer I returned to Tom I hardly know. I remember that the poor fellow's face fell, and that he murmured something which I did not heed. And then I found myself walking in the garden under the great cedar, having stepped out of the window almost unconsciously, and left Tom standing there alone. It was very good of him ever to forgive me. Wandering about in the garden, my wife saw me from her window, and met me as I turned a corner in the shrubbery. And now I am going to have my revenge upon her in a way she does not expect, for making me tell the story. I will tell her share in it. "What is the matter with you, Henry?" she asked. "Oh, not much," I answered. "Only that Weir has been making me rather uncomfortable." "What has he been doing?" she inquired, in some alarm. "It is not possible he has done anything wrong." My wife trusted him as much as I did. "No," I answered, "not anything exactly wrong." "It must be very nearly wrong, Henry, to make you look so miserable." I began to feel unshamed and more uncomfortable. "He has been falling in love with Martha," I said, "and when I put one thing to another, I fear he may have made her fall in love with him too." My wife laughed merrily. "What a wicked curate!" "Well, but you know it is not exactly agreeable." "Why?" "You know why well enough." "At least, I am not going to take it for granted. Is he not a good man?" "Yes." "Is he not a well-educated man?" "As well as myself, for his years." "Is he not clever?" "One of the cleverest fellows I ever met." "Is he not a gentleman?" "I have not a fault to find with his manners." "Nor with his habits?" my wife went on. "No." "Nor with his ways of thinking?" "No. But, Ethelwyn, you know what I mean quite well. His family, you know." "Well, is his father not a respectable man?" "Oh, yes, certainly, thoroughly respectable." "He wouldn't borrow money of his tailor instead of paying for his clothes, would he?" "Certainly not." "And if he were to die to-day he would carry no debts to heaven with him?" "I believe not." "Does he bear false witness against his neighbour?" "No, he scorns a lie as much as any man I ever knew." "Which of the commandments is it in particular that he breaks, then?" "None that I know of, excepting that no one can keep them yet that is only human. He tries to keep every one of them, I do believe." Well, I think Tom very fortunate in having such a father. I wish my mother had been as good." "That is all true, and yet—" "And yet, suppose a young man you liked had had a fashionable father who had ruined half a score of tradespeople by his extravagance. Would you object to him because of his family? Perhaps not. Then with you position outweighs honesty, in fathers at least." To this I was not ready with an answer, and my wife went on. "It might be reasonable if you did, though, from fear lest he should turn out like his father. But do you know why I would not accept your offer of taking my name when I should succeed to the property?" "You said you liked mine better," I answered. "So I did. But I did not tell you that I was ashamed that my good husband should take a name which for centuries had been borne by hard-hearted, worldly-minded people who, to speak the truth of my ancestors to my husband, were neither gentle nor honest nor high-minded. Still, Ethelwyn, you know there is something in it, though it is not so easy to say what, and you avoid that. I suppose Martha has been talking you over to her side." "Harry," my wife said, with a shade of solemnity, "I am almost ashamed of you for the first time, and I will punish you by telling you the truth. Do you think I had nothing of that sort to get over when I began to find that I was thinking a little more about you than was quite convenient under the circumstances? Your manners, dear Harry, though irreproachable, just had not the tone that I had been accustomed to. There was a diffidence about you also that did not at first advance you in my regard." "Yes, yes," I answered, a little piqued. "I dare say. I have no doubt you thought me a boor." "Dear Harry!" "I beg your pardon, wifey. I know you didn't. But it is quite bad enough to have brought you down to my level, without sinking you still lower." "Now there you are wrong, Harry. And that is what I want to show you. I found that my love to you would not be satisfied with making an exception in your favour. I must see what force there really was in the notions I had been bred in." "Ah," I said, "I see. You looked for a principle in what you had thought was an exception." "Yes," returned my wife, "and I soon found one. And the next step was to throw away all false judgment in regard to such things. And so I can see more clearly than you into the right of the matter. Would you hesitate a moment between Tom Weir and the dissolute son of an earl, Harry? You know I would not. Well, just carry out the considerations that suggests, and you will find that where there's in everything personally noble, pure, simple, and good, the lowliness of a man's birth is but an added honour to him. For it shows that his nobility is altogether from within him, and therefore is not his own. It cannot then have been put on him by education or imitation, as many men's manners are, who wear their good breeding like their fine clothes, or as the Pharisee his prayers, to be seen of men." "But his sister?" "Harry, Harry, you were preaching last Sunday about the way God thinks of things, and you said that was the only true way of thinking about them. Would the Mary that poured the ointment on Jesus' head have refused to marry a good man because he was the brother of that Mary who poured it on his feet? Have you thought what God would think of Tom for a husband to Martha?" I did not answer, for conscience had begun to speak. When I lifted my eyes from the ground, thinking Ethelwyn stood beside me, she was gone. I felt as if she were dead, to punish me for my pride. But still I could not get over it, though I was ashamed to follow and find her. I went and got my hat instead, and strolled out. What was it that drew me towards Thomas Weir's shop? I think it must have been incipient repentance, a feeling that I had wronged the man. But just as I turned the corner and the smell of the wood reached me, the picture so often associated in my mind with such a scene of human labour rose before me. I saw the Lord of Life bending over his bench, fashioning some lowly utensil for some housewife of Nazareth. And he would receive payment for it too, for he at least could see no disgrace in the order of things that his Father had appointed. It is the vulgar mind that looks down on the earning and worships the inheriting of money. How infinitely more poetic is the belief that our Lord did his work like any other honest man, than that straining after his glorification in the early centuries of the Church by the invention of fables even to the disgrace of his father. They say that Joseph was a bad carpenter, and our Lord had to work miracles to set things right which he had made wrong. To such a class of mind as invented these fables do those belong who think they honour our Lord when they judge anything human too common or too unclean for him to have done. And the thought sprung up at once in my mind, if I ever did see our Lord face to face, how shall I feel if he says to me, "Didst thou do well to murmur that thy sister espoused a certain man, for that in his youth he had earned his bread as I earned mine? Where was then thy right to say unto me, Lord, Lord?" I hurried into the workshop. "Has Tom told you about it?" I said. "Yes, sir, and I told him to mind what he was about, for he was not a gentleman, and you was, sir." "I hope I am, and Tom is as much a gentleman as I have any claim to be." Thomas Weir held out his hand. "Now, sir, I do believe you mean in my shop what you say in your pulpit, and there is one Christian in the world at least. But what will your good lady say? She's higher born than you, no offence, sir." "Ah, Thomas, you shame me. I am not so good as you think me. It was my wife that brought me to reason about it. God bless her." "Amen. I'm going to find Tom." At that same moment Tom entered the shop, with a very melancholy face. He started when he saw me, and looked confused. "Tom, my boy," I said, "I behaved very badly to you. I am sorry for it. Come back with me, and have a walk with my sister. I don't think she'll be sorry to see you." His face brightened up at once, and we left the shop together. Evidently with a great effort Tom was the first to speak. "I know, sir, how many difficulties my presumption must put you in." "Not another word about it, Tom. You are blameless. I wish I were. If we only act as God would have us, other considerations may look after themselves. Or rather, he will look after them. The world will never be right till the mind of God is the measure of things, and the will of God the law of things. In the kingdom of heaven nothing else is acknowledged. Until that kingdom come, the mind and will of God must, with those that look for that kingdom, override every other way of thinking, feeling, and judging. I see it more plainly than ever I did. Take my sister in God's name, Tom, and be good to her." Tom went to find Martha, and I to find Ethelwyn. "It is all right," I said, "even to the shame I feel at having needed your reproof." "Don't think of that. God gives us all time to come to our right minds, you know," answered my wife. "But how did you get on so far ahead of me, wifie?" Ethelwyn laughed. "Why," she said, "I only told you back again what you have been telling me for the last 7 or 8 years." So to me the message had come first, but my wife had answered first with the deed. And now I have had my revenge on her. Next to her and my children, Tom has been my greatest comfort for many years. He is still my curate, and I do not think we shall part till death part us for a time. My sister is worth twice what she was before, though they have no children. We have many, and they have taught me much. Thomas Weir is now too old to work any longer. He occupies his father's chair in the large room of the old house. The workshop I have had turned into a schoolroom, of the external condition of which his daughter takes good care, while a great part of her brother Tom's time is devoted to the children. For he and I agree that, where it can be done, the pastoral care ought to be at least equally divided between the sheep and the lambs. For the sooner the children are brought under right influences, I do not mean a great deal of religious speech, but the right influences of truth and honesty, and an evident regard to what God wants of us, not only are they the more easily wrought upon, but the sooner do they recognize those influences as right and good. And while Tom quite agrees with me that there must not be much talk about religion, he thinks that there must be just the more acting upon religion, and that if it be everywhere at hand in all things taught and done, it will be ready to show itself to everyone who looks for it. And besides that, action is more powerful than speech in the inculcation of religion. Tom says there is no such corrective of sectarianism of every kind as the repression of speech and the encouragement of action. Besides being a great help to me and everybody else almost in Marshmallows, Tom has distinguished himself in the literary world, and when I read his books I am yet prouder of my brother-in-law. I am only afraid that Martha is not good enough for him. But she certainly improves, as I have said already. Jane Rogers was married to young Brownrigg about a year after we were married. The old man is all but confined to the chimney corner now, and Richard manages the farm, though not quite to his father's satisfaction, of course. but they are doing well notwithstanding. The old mill has been superseded by one of new and rare device, built by Richard. But the old cottage where his wife's parents lived has slowly mouldered back to the dust, for the old people have been dead for many years. Often in the summer days, as I go to or come from the vestry, I sit down for a moment on the turf that covers my old friend, and think that every day is mouldering away this body of mine till it shall fall a heap of dust into its appointed place. But what is that to me? It is to me the drawing nigh of the fresh morning of life, when I shall be young and strong again, glad in the presence of the wise and beloved dead, and unspeakably glad in the presence of my God, which I have now but hope to possess far more hereafter. I will not take a solemn leave of my friends just yet, for I hope to hold a little more communion with them ere I go hence. I know that my mental faculty is growing weaker, but some power yet remains, and I say to myself, perhaps this is the final trial of your faith, to trust in God to take care of your intellect for you, and to believe, in weakness, the truths He revealed to you in strength. Remember that truth depends not upon your seeing it, and believe as you saw when your sight was at its best. For then you saw that the truth was beyond all you could see. Thus I try to prepare for dark days that may come, but which cannot come without God in them. And meantime I hope to be able to communicate some more of the good things experience and thought have taught me, and it may be that some more of the events that have befallen my friends and myself in our pilgrimage. So, kind readers, God be with you. That is the older and better form of goodbye. End of chapter 34. Recording by Eric Metzler, Albuquerque, New Mexico, United States of America. End of Annals of a Quiet Neighborhood, by George MacDonald.